The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. This is Danny Ryan from ThreeWill, and I welcome you all to today's podcast. I have with me Eric Bowden. Eric is a principal consultant and is going to help out today with covering some questions in particular about integrating Salesforce and Office 365. Just a couple of things before we get started. One is if there's questions that come up, feel free to ask your questions in the go to webinar questions panel. This will be recorded, so you'll get an email next week from me that has a link to the recording. So if you want to share this with other colleagues that perhaps couldn't make it, you should see an email from me on that. Today, as far as what I wanted to cover with regards to content today was to cover a recent blog post that Eric had done on the top 10 things that you should know about integrating Salesforce and Office 365. I think to get started here, first off, welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Danny. Glad to have you.
You betcha. Thanks for joining me for this. I appreciate you writing the blog post, and I know you're really, this is something that you're passionate about, both Salesforce and Office 365. You started the blog post out with some information about Gartner's, I guess it's application platform as a service, and noticed that both Salesforce and Microsoft were the leaders in that. In fact, you put a little link to that as well, that they seem to be the leaders as far as application as a enterprise. Let me make sure I can get that out right. Enterprise application platform as a service. I think I got that right. Yeah, there we go. So that's nice to see them both putting out solid products there. I think what we wanted to do in this conversation was maybe just to focus in on integration between Salesforce and Office 365. Maybe to get us started off, I know you've got sort of a progression of things that you want to cover with regards to integration. The first thing that you start off with is considering off-the-shelf offerings. Tell me more about that, Eric.
Yeah, and before I dig into the first one, let me just kind of introduce a little bit about what that progression looks like. And
sure.
As I go through these top 10, just kind of be listening and thinking about that. We're going to sort of start off by talking about, what have others built in the past, what are products, off-the-shelf products that I can use, and then we'll sort of, enter another step of complexity where we're saying, okay, how can I use, the platform capabilities, in order to build my own integration, and then we'll end up with, what about if I pull out what are kind of the deep developer skills, really getting into writing code, and then I'll sort of finish off by talking about, what are some strategies and things we need to be thinking about, across all of these areas. But to start off with, we're talking about off-the-shelf offerings, and Salesforce and Microsoft both have an app store. So on the Salesforce side, there's the App Exchange. The App Exchange, it's a great resource, many products to choose from. Your best place to start is you're going to appexchange.salesforce.com and search for Office 365. So if you execute a search for Office 365, you'll see a number of options that come right up. And these are, many of the products that you see are free. One product that you'll see is called Trove, and Trove is a product that we created, released just within the last month, and Trove is a product that allows users in Salesforce to save attachments for accounts and opportunities over into SharePoint Sites and Office 365. So it's intended to really mirror that experience for attachments. But that's just one example of an application that's in the App Exchange. A number of the other applications that you'll see are, they tend to be focused on Outlook and Exchange integrations. With the App Exchange and Salesforce, there are really a number of easy ways to get started. The very easiest way is that developer environments for Salesforce, those can be created. Those are free environments that anyone can, you can create your own developer org and get started and experiment with apps off the App Exchange, or you can install them, into production and sandbox orgs.
Great, great. So, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to, on the Microsoft side, there's the Office store. So you're going to, office.microsoft.com, or excuse me, store.office.com, I think is what it is. And the similar stories you have on the Salesforce side, where you can search for Salesforce in this case, and you'll see a number of applications and that come up. And similar as you saw on the Salesforce side, these tend to be focused on integrations with Outlook.
Great. It looks like you also mentioned some developer tooling like the MuleSoft integration and those types of things as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So don't just stay in the App Store, but expand out beyond the App Store. There are products that are created for really integrating applications like Salesforce and Office 365 together that aren't in the App Exchange. So MuleSoft is one of them. Layer 2 Connect is another one that I've seen.
Awesome. Now the next one you go and cover is the Files Connect, and tell me more about what is Files Connect.
Sure. So yeah, so now it's where, first off we're looking at products, and now we're going to kind of step in and see what are the platforms providing for me that are kind of built in. And Files Connect is a great place to start. So Files Connect is as the name implies, it's a files integration, and the a use case for that is I'm in the social tool in Salesforce, which is called Chatter, and from that Chatter experience I can share files with other users and sort of bring attention, have conversation around these files. That's a built-in experience. But with Files Connect, I can actually browse documents and document libraries that are in SharePoint, and I'm browsing those and sharing them in Chatter into the Salesforce user interface. And there's two different modes. There's two different ways that Files Connect works. One is that you can share files as a copy, or you can share files from SharePoint into your Chatter feed as a reference or just a link. And the benefits there, the kind of pros and cons, is if you share your file as a copy, then there's a viewer. There are viewers built into Salesforce that'll let you view that content right in the Salesforce UI. Kind of the drawbacks are that you've now then kind of transitioned the control and the permissions controls that you have around that document, because you just made a copy. You sort of transition that over into Salesforce.
We had a nice comment from somebody from Salesforce about you can also support external objects like the SharePoint files, like seeing them as a related list.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. So that's my next point. There is learning about external objects in Salesforce. So Files Connect, for that option, you're thinking about file-based integration, and then external objects, that is for records-based integration or requirements. So with external objects, you can render a custom list which lives in SharePoint. You can render that object into the UI within Salesforce. It can, that custom object, as the person who added the comment mentioned, it can be added as a related list. So kind of a lookup list to existing objects that are in your Salesforce environment, and then they can also be their own tab. For those who are accustomed to using Salesforce, you go to a tab to see an object, and you can create views around that object. Now, one thing to keep in mind, put a note there in the blog that the external objects and Files Connect, those are read-only experiences. So you can read information from SharePoint and render that in Salesforce, but you can't write back to it.
Great. Another comment is you also have the ability to do more about full text search within SharePoint, so just searching beyond what the title is. So some nice integration there as well. Had another question from someone else about is this functionality, does this work on-prem, Office 365, or both? Do you know that?
Yeah, the majority of the experience that I have with external objects and Files Connect is with, SharePoint and Office 365. If that on-prem environment, if it's exposed through the firewall, which that would be a first step in order for Salesforce to connect to it, and then the next step, is around authentication. And I don't know, I don't have an answer right off on that. I know that I've seen where the auth providers in Salesforce, they'll support forms authentication. So if you had a website in SharePoint that were exposed using forms auth, then it would be able to authenticate. But I haven't seen the more popular options for authenticating the SharePoint are NTLM, Kerberos, claims authentication. I haven't seen that myself, but I haven't really gone down that route.
We are fortunate enough to have the Files Connect product manager on the line. So some of the things that was pointed out was that Files Connect supports both SharePoint Online, SharePoint 2010, 2013 on premises, and it doesn't sound like you do need to have SharePoint exposed. I'm not sure. We can probably go into more detail in a separate conversation, but just letting you know about that.
Okay, good to know.
Cool.
Good to know.
I love the interaction. Any more questions folks have or any more comments? Laurent, thanks for the input here. Really appreciate it. Next one looks like what the heck are named credentials?
Sure. So yeah. With this fourth bullet now is where we're starting to pull out our custom app dev skills. In Salesforce there are what are called Visual Force pages, the equivalent of ASP.NET pages. In the Microsoft world, and Apex is the programming language, kind of roughly the equivalent of C# in the .NET land. And named credentials, this is just one of the infrastructure features that exist in Salesforce on which we can build our custom solutions. And the first two that we talked about, which were Files Connect and external objects, these build on something in Salesforce which are called auth providers. I kind of touched on that briefly, and we touched on it with talking about authentication to the on-prem instances of SharePoint. One of the things that it supports is OAuth connections to SharePoint in Office 365. And that same auth provider that you might have configured for Files Connect or external objects, or in the same way that you've configured it, there's a feature called named credentials, which can leverage that same auth provider. So what this does is this really helps a developer, get out from under the pain of, needing to, to custom code the OAuth authentication into SharePoint. Instead, we can leverage, the authentication that's really built into the platform. And one thing to highlight there that's kind of neat, I think, about the auth providers and named credentials is that it supports service accounts out of the box. So as part of configuring this named credential, I can say I want to use a service principal, and what it'll do is it'll ask me to authenticate right then, and I'll authenticate as the user that I want that named credential to use in the future, and it'll store it, and it'll reuse that that credential for future calls. So yeah, named credentials are a great feature. Also, you can build with external objects. There is the ability to create your own custom connectors. So there are a number of external objects. For example, the the underlying connectivity option that it's using for calling into SharePoint Office 365 is an OData. It's expecting an OData enabled data source, and you have the ability to create your own custom connectors for data sources that don't support OData or don't support some of the other protocols that are supported out of the box.
Awesome. Looks like that's something as well that you ended up using within Trove as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, Trove, with Trove, so the last option is that you can, you really have full control Apex within the Salesforce platform is quite powerful, and you can make call-outs, HTTP requests to any endpoint that you desire. You can perform redirects and so forth. Very powerful. And what we did for Trove was used really custom code for authenticating in Office 365, and we did that because we wanted to make what are called application principal authentication, or app-only calls into SharePoint. So you really do have the the full capability for your integration if you don't want to use the or have a need not to use the the capabilities of the platform.
And I know we've got a lot of people who, since we've done a lot of Microsoft integrations, they might not be as familiar with some of the stuff on the Salesforce side. What is Apex? What is that? What's the equivalent of that maybe over on the Microsoft side?
Sure. Yeah. So Apex is it's a programming language which is proprietary to the Force.com platform. It's usually, I see it described as being very Java-like. I'm not a Java developer myself, so I see it as being very C#-like. But it supports the same class, method, properties type programming paradigm that you're used to. There are, of course, key differences, but you kind of they don't end up being major architectural differences, and you kind of learn those over time. And then I mentioned also what kind of goes alongside Apex is Visual Force, which Visual Force is that's how custom web pages are programmed in on the Force.com platform, and it's equivalent to an ASP.NET application, the ASPX page. You can also think of it as similar to MVC, Razor Forms, that sort of a thing. But it's and both of these are very powerful and really give you I won't say unlimited, but seemingly almost unlimited customization capabilities on the platform.
Cool. So it sounds like we've hit a couple of things on the Salesforce side as far as technologies that you'd want to take advantage of, or at least take a look at if you're integrating between Salesforce and Office 365. Now the fifth one is something about synchronization of data as part of a scheduled task. Tell me more about that one.
Right. Yeah. So this one's maybe a little bit of a detour from the path that we've been taking, but it's kind of to take a step back, because oftentimes when folks are thinking about integrating to systems, they almost always sort of go right to a real-time integration. So, and by that I mean I want to render a page in Salesforce and have it in a real-time fashion pull that data from SharePoint and render it in Salesforce. The external objects, name, credentials will give that to you because those are real-time calls. But don't forget, what are the, and I'll call it kind of the old school, data synchronization options, where you're really just taking a copy of the data which exists in SharePoint, you're copying it over to Salesforce, or maybe copying it from Salesforce into SharePoint. And there are a couple of neat advantages of that. One is that it can be technically a lot simpler, so fewer moving parts. But then another advantage is that you get the full fidelity experience of both platforms. So if I copy my data from which lives in SharePoint lists over into Salesforce, and I'm copying those into custom objects in Salesforce, well then I have the full experience. I can use formula fields, I can include those custom objects and reports, and those are some features that I wouldn't be able to use if I were using external objects. So, I just threw that one in there just to, don't discount that right off the bat, because sometimes a batch synchronization, it's a simple option, but oftentimes that can be cost effective and meet the integration needs.
So sometimes it does make sense to roll your own in this case.
Right.
Yeah. I have to drink more coffee because I don't know if I picked up all of what you just said. But all right, number six. Okay,
so next, let's jump over to the SharePoint side. So SharePoint
on the SharePoint side.
And similar track as we've rolled through with Salesforce is, let's think about what are the integration options on the SharePoint side. Business connectivity services is that has been the integration story for SharePoint for some time. It's a very powerful option that provides read-write experience. You're really rendering this external data, really in the experience of a custom list in SharePoint. At the moment, it doesn't support direct connectivity to Salesforce. So what you're going to be looking for there is a middle tier application, a middle tier service that really brokers that communication from SharePoint through to Salesforce, which sounds like a lot of, on the surface it may sound like a lot of moving parts, but being able to easily render that Salesforce data as a custom list, there's a big value in that. And there are some third-party product companies out there. I think Layer 2 is another one that I saw. They kind of popped up in a couple of places as serving as that middle tier. And I think there are probably some other options, or of course, kind of rolling your own.
Awesome.
Yeah. So next one is Power BI. So Power BI, and I think and it's kind of hard for me to decide for sure which of these, kind of rise to the top for me, but I think Power BI would probably be my first stop on the SharePoint side if I want to render Salesforce data for my SharePoint users, because it is just so easy to get started. It's I don't know, 5 or 6 clicks, and you have connectivity with Salesforce in your SharePoint environment. It comes with 2 dashboards. There's one that supports the sales managers, and there's one that supports sales reps that's pre-configured, and then of course you have the ability to to customize that. It's handling the authentication for you, and just doing a great job at helping to get you started. So that's definitely one that that's kind of the easy button. Similar as external objects on the Salesforce side. The Power BI, of course, is a read-only experience, so it won't meet all of your needs, but it's a great choice for for reporting options.
And for those folks who last month we actually, was it last month? I think we covered a similar, a top 10 around what you need to know about Power BI. We did record that, and we've also got a deck that you can go through as well as you want to. I'll put that into the chat window as well. So I think that's another topic that we're pretty excited about, is Power BI. So number 8, provider hosted apps. What's a provider hosted app, just to get started?
Yeah, so provider hosted apps, so now on the SharePoint side of things is where we're really digging in, we're really pulling out our custom app dev skills. So provider hosted apps, this is where you can develop an ASP.NET web application, and you can really render that within the user interface of SharePoint. And because it is an ASP.NET web application, typically hosted in Azure, you have full control over the rendering. You're really serving as that middle tier broker between Salesforce and SharePoint. And so one product one example of a provider hosted app. So ThreeWill has built a chatter integration between Office 365 and Salesforce, which is a provider hosted app, and it surfaces a chatter feed, and it's read-write, so users can not only view a feed, but they can also like, post, and so forth in the SharePoint UI, and it renders this what's called an app part. So it's right within the the user interface of, say, a SharePoint site. One of the things that allowed us to do, just to kind of talk about the heavy lifting, an example in a provider-hosted app, is that we use a certificate-based authentication into Salesforce. So there's something called and Salesforce has a number of authentication options. They're very well documented, OAuth authentication options. One of them is called the SAML bearer flow, and that's what this integration uses, and what it allows us to do is it allows our integration to trade certificates with Salesforce, and we can then sign requests using that certificate for making API calls into Salesforce, and we can assert the user's identity. And so what that really ends up doing is it provides users with a great single sign-on experience, so that they don't need to authenticate to Salesforce, and neither do they need to sort of authorize the OAuth connection, the user consent flow that you may be accustomed to. So yeah, provider-hosted apps, definitely a great option to look at. There is starting with Visual Studio 2015, there is what's called Salesforce services, which are built into Visual Studio. That is a great option. If you're a developer and you want to say, hey, I want to sit down in an afternoon, create an application which connects to Salesforce and renders a UI, using Visual Studio 2015 and the Salesforce services extensions is a great way to do that, because it does a number of things for you that were somewhat difficult in the past. Some of the things that it does is it sets up that OAuth connection for you. Within the Salesforce side of things, there's something called connected apps, and that is the kind of the OAuth endpoint, the OAuth authorization for apps to call into Salesforce. Well, the Salesforce Services extension, it configures all of that for you. The Salesforce Services extension, it works with the MVC apps, so it creates the model for you. There is sample code. There's a walkthrough. I have a link kind of down toward the bottom of this post that really walks you through a great walkthrough of getting started with your first app, and that walkthrough will guide you through, okay, creating my model, creating my controller, and a view, so that you'll really be, and actually it has the walkthrough has full CRUD capability, so you can edit, view, delete records right from your first walkthrough. So I can't say enough probably about that option. It's a really neat step forward, the Salesforce Services extension.
And it sounds like, Eric, you're doing a lot of, and I just wanted to point this out a while back. I remember you did this blog post, which was after you went to one of the Dreamforces. You ended up covering like sort of what Salesforce is for SharePoint devs, because I think a lot of this is sort of hitting one platform versus the other. And I just wanted to point this out for folks too, that I know we probably have a pretty Microsoft heavy crowd. So if you're wanting to learn more about sort of the similarities between Salesforce and SharePoint, it's sort of, Eric does a good job, and I'll put this into the chat window as well. But I'm just interested, what has been your experience, Eric, of doing more SharePoint Office 365 development versus starting to do some stuff with Salesforce? Has it been pretty easy mapping, or tell me a little bit more about that experience?
Thanks for bringing up that blog post, and great point. For my Microsoft developer friends who are interested in getting into Salesforce, as Danny mentioned, there is a great mapping. As I already pointed out, Apex versus C#, Visualforce versus ASP.NET Web Applications, MVC Razor, and so forth. And as you go along, you're constantly coming across great parallels. Connected apps is what you have on the Salesforce side of things. On the SharePoint side of things, you have application principles, and so there's another parallel. And there are provider-hosted apps on the SharePoint side of things, which are hosted in Azure. And then on the Salesforce side of things, there's something called Canvas apps, which are hosted in a platform called Heroku. Heroku being, and I don't have deep knowledge on Heroku, but it seems to be very equivalent to, an Azure-based environment. So, if you head down that Salesforce app dev route, you'll be really pleased to see that a lot of things are very familiar to you, and a lot of times it comes down to the fact that I think great minds think alike, and a lot of times kind of arrive at a very similar solution. So it's been a great experience. I've been thrilled.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So the number 9.
Sure. So plan for authentication. So this is one of those, I think kind of a strategy or a thought, and honestly, I could probably build on a few more that you need to be kind of thinking about all along. As you're sort of traveling over, okay, am I going to use an out-of-the-box product? Am I going to use app dev? If I do use app dev, which side is it going to be on? Is this going to be synchronization or real-time? But really kind of traveling through all of those decisions is authentication. And a lot of the authentication comes down to, am I going to use a service account, or are users going to authenticate on their own? And there are pros and cons. A lot of times a service account is a much simpler way to accomplish an integration because you don't need to require users to authenticate themselves or create the UI for it. But on the other hand, the questions you need to ask is, is security trimming important? If security trimming is important, then you certainly wouldn't want to use a service account. And then, of course, audit trails. If you're using a service account, anything that's deleted or updated, added, and so forth, that's going to all, be attributed to your service account. And of course, is there going to be an interactive user? Is anyone even present to, to authenticate? That's something that is going to impact your authentication. Third bullet point there is around storing of secrets. So, there are a number of secrets with the OAuth authentication, and even if maybe you're using a service account where you have a username and password, of course that's a secret. So, does your integration have an option? And the methods that have the ability to store secrets are usually those that have server-side code, like a provider-hosted app or an Apex Visualforce page with Apex running behind it. Those that can't store secrets tend to be those that are maybe running in JavaScript. Maybe you have a pure JavaScript application, and so that's not going to, that you're not going to really be able to store. You maybe have some options. You have to think about it, but for storing secrets. And the last bullet there is around certificate signed credentials, which that's really has come up, more around our Chatter integration, where we're the particular OAuth flow that we're using for impersonating users. But really those, just kind of be thinking about what are our authentication requirements, because that's really going to impact your decisions all along the way.
Cool. So number 10, online training. Sounds like an important one.
Yeah, and this is a topic, honestly, I've had a lot of passion around lately, and it kind of comes down to the fact that things are changing fast, and we all need to be very efficient in the way that we learn new things. We need to find data that gives us the right answer, and that has been designed and is well tested. I listed out a few here. Really my top 3. Top is Pluralsight. I love Pluralsight subscriptions. There are numerous courses on Salesforce and Office 365, and then of course a myriad of courses which are technologies that apply to both, like OAuth, Angular, Bootstrap. You name it. Pluralsight is a great place, and you can search the catalog in Pluralsight before you sign up. So if you're looking for something in particular and you're not already subscribing to Pluralsight, you can check and see if it's there, or check with some friends, check with me. Is this a good course? Do you recommend that I sign up just for this course? In some cases, the answer is yes. It's worth the monthly cost just for one, maybe one key course. Next, there's the Microsoft Virtual Training Academy. That's a free resource, excellent courses online. Also, not only Microsoft focused, but also plenty of generic content. Salesforce has Trailhead, which are a number of online training content. It's also a free resource. And then the last 4 here, kind of going into some specific areas, that I recommend that you kind of focus in on. As I mentioned earlier, kind of trying to pick out what I think are the, sort of the most interesting things for folks to go after. Lightning Connect is definitely one of the most interesting ones, which external objects, which I covered earlier, are really part of Lightning Connect, and so that's where you'll learn about that. Power BI, I think seems to be also, right up at the top of what I recommend you have a look at. And you can really, like I said, it's really fast to, and I'm not a deep Power BI person myself. I just sort of clicked sign up and nexted my way through it and kind of dug into it a little bit. So this is really a great, it's a real easy option to explore.
Sorry, I'm playing a little Vanna White there for you.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So connected services in Visual Studio, that is a link, I think, to a Salesforce blog, which is the, let's see if that pops up there. I think that's the walkthrough. Yeah, and that is an excellent introduction to Salesforce services. When you get to the end of the wizard, which you can kind of see a screen snap of the wizard there where they're selecting out Salesforce objects. When you get to the end of that wizard, it opens up a web page for you that's titled like, getting started. And a lot of times those web pages pop up and we just sort of dismiss them right away. Don't dismiss that one because that has your walkthrough on it. So you'll see on the left-hand side it walks you through creating your controller and your views and so forth and so on. So definitely recommend that you have a look at that. And then the last one there is just kind of a getting started with provider hosted apps in SharePoint 2013. And I just recommend you have a look at that because that is, that's just kind of a key foundation for, customizing SharePoint and Office 365 or provider-hosted apps. And, something that you definitely want to, become familiar with because so many things, build on it.
I've got a couple more things I know I'm going to cover after we finish off this blog post, but if you could just, I guess with these parting thoughts, put together, sort of a summary of what you've covered so far, that would be great.
Yeah, just kind of summarizing, the themes of these top 10, and I think the first one there, determining if your data, does it need to be in real time or can it be delivered as part of a scheduled task? And there again, we're just looking at, usually you want to look at the simplest and the most cost-effective, way to solve your integration needs. A lot of times a scheduled task will be the, that could be a really simple option. Take a look at third-party products. A lot of products have been built. There are companies that are really focused on connecting applications together. I know MuleSoft is one that I mentioned, Layer 2. And there may be some others, in fact I'm certain there are. And then look at your custom app dev options in Salesforce and Office 365. That's really my specialty myself is custom app dev, so that's kind of a favorite of mine. Don't forget to evaluate the costs of the solution. So whether you're, it's a custom built solution or is it a product that you're going to purchase. There are, there are going to be licensing costs for most products, or, of course, app dev costs, not only for, building the product now, but then maintaining it in the future. And another aspect to which I don't think I mentioned earlier about buying products is that, if you use an out-of-the-box product, product or a feature that's already been built, one of the advantages there is that you're really, you're kind of joining onto the product roadmap for that product. So not only are you sort of buying it and adopting it now, but you may see, better value, over time as that product or, those features are built. So, you definitely want to, as part of products, think about, where's this product going? They've built, they've built some things. Maybe it doesn't do all I need, but, will it do, more in the future? And the last bullet there is just, again, find the training and learn more. There are, like I said, I think that, folks have really been honing their, the delivery of content. Everybody's sort of struggling to keep up, and, I think you'll be impressed with the, the online resources that are out there.
And I want to maybe before we're coming up on got about 20 minutes left here, but I'll probably just want to use about 10 of them. But what I wanted to do was, I think you've been mentioning Trove quite a bit and talking about that maybe as an example of an integration between Salesforce and Office 365. What I'm interested in here is sort of the approach on the Salesforce side, and then even some of the recent approach that you've taken with the building an Office app. Mind going into any more detail on that at all?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of talked through some of the technical pieces of that application, just to give you an idea of what a custom integration app can look like, and what this is made up of. I don't know if you maybe have a screen snap there, Danny, that you can bring up. I think the second one might be appropriate. There we go. So you can see down there at the bottom it says click on the file name to edit. And what that box is right there is, let's see if you're going to get it zoomed in. That is a Visualforce page.
All right. Maybe a little too, I think I got a little too aggressive on the zoom in there. I was just going to pick it out. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, that works. But what you can do in Salesforce is you can take what is a custom page, a Visualforce page, and again, equivalent to the ASP.NET web applications. You can take that Visualforce page and you can embed it within what's called a layout page in Salesforce. And a layout page, sort of as the name implies, is, kind of lays out a record for you. And you can see right here that this is the layout page for an account. And what we've done as part of Trove is that there is a Visualforce page, which you can sort of see a line there, and you see files. The section right below files, that is a Visualforce page. And for folks who are familiar with provider-hosted apps on the SharePoint side, this is a lot like, in terms of the iframing. That's an iframe there, and it's rendering a Visualforce page there on the layout for that account. Now, in the back end, there is Apex code, which is behind this Visualforce page, and that Apex code is handling things like authentication to Office 365. It also handles the file upload. For example, Visualforce pages have a lot of AJAX style support built in, and one of the things that is accomplished on this page, it's called remote actions in Visualforce, and when you upload a file, it's called a remote action, which you could think of it as a JavaScript HTTP request, back to the controller to upload that file. So it's uploading that file in chunks. On the Office side of things, so in our first version of Trove, one of the things that you would have to do, we would have our users, go through this process of creating an application principal on the SharePoint side of things. And for those who are familiar, you go to appregnew.aspx and you create an application principal, and then you give it this application principal, the permissions, so forth and so on. And for the Salesforce folks on the phone, what I just described is the equivalent of creating a connected app, but you're creating it over on the Salesforce side. Well, to make that installation process easier, we're in the process right now of working on getting Trove into the Office store. And once we get Trove into the Office store, the client ID and the client secret and the permissions for that client, those are all really installed as part of, or set, configured, as part of installing the application in SharePoint. So that's kind of the Office store side of things. And so Trove then, and I think there may be some other examples of this, if not now, probably more in the future, where it really has two components. There's sort of an app exchange component for Trove, and then there's an Office store component for Trove.
Awesome. Very cool. I'm sorry, I've been just sort of going around as you've been talking here, just pulling up a couple of different pages that I thought would be relevant. For folks who are on the phone, any other questions that folks might have? I'll keep an eye out on questions as we've covered this. Eric, I appreciate you taking the time to both write this up. So I know you've been pretty busy with some of these integrations, and I appreciate you taking the time to share with everybody in the community about this. If you wanted to get in touch with Eric, if you on the blog post that I shared, I had a nice comment about Trailhead. I think a lot of people internally have been using Trailhead to learn more about Salesforce. That's been a pretty important place. But if you wanted to connect with Eric, just on any of the blog posts that he's written, if there's a hyperlink over his name, and from there you would be able to connect up with him through LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm happy and eager to field any questions if you're working on integration, and you have any stopping points or just looking for high-level strategies. Just feel free to send me a note.
The key thing from this is we hope this has given everybody sort of an overview of 10 different, sort of things that you want to take a look at, and both on the Salesforce side and on the Office 365 side. If there are, if there's some follow-up questions or more you want to dive into more detail, if you go to the Contact Us section of our website, this will actually schedule a meeting with me, and I'll pull Eric in on it as well. If you wanted to maybe dive into both the BI subject, I'll pull Bo in for that, or if you wanted to talk more about integrating Salesforce with Office 365, just feel free to set up a follow-up call with me. I'd love to talk to you more about that. Really appreciate everybody taking the time today to learn more about this important subject. Also, you'll get an email from me next week that will have a link to this recorded session. And with that, I hope that Eric, one last time, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Great, thank you for having me.
You betcha. And everybody have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy yourself this weekend, and thanks again for taking the time to join us today. Thank you. Bye-bye.